On the smart city side, fascinating area, who do you think should pay for some of these amazing ideas if they're to be rolled out across lots of cities?
I suppose not a great answer, but it kind of got to take it on a case-by-case basis. So the reason we set up the Smart Docklands initiative was so that we could understand not just the technology, but the business models involved as well. So I think, for the 3D model, it was an investment on Dublin City Council's behalf. Initially, we're starting to see the benefits now of a lot of developers are using it whenever they're putting in plans back to the City Council. They're using that to visualize it in situ. So I think not necessarily a great answer, but trying to understand what the business models are as part of what the Smart City program is about.
Okay. And the ones that we saw were the ones that did get through and did get funding.
Yeah.
There's always more things that aren't possible generally in life than the ones that you do get away. Are there any weird and wonderful, crazy ideas that are still on the back burner, as it were, that you'd love to see one day?
Yeah, there's all types of, one that I got contacted about yesterday, the day before, was autonomous bicycles and scooters. So, we have electric scooters in a lot of cities around the world now. Electric scooters aren't allowed in Dublin at the minute, but hopefully will be soon. But autonomous scooters, so if you come out of your building, you can call a scooter or a bike, it will drive itself to your front door, and then you will take it from there. And that technology will actually be tested in Dublin from January, so it is there. It's not that far away, believe it or not.
I think I saw the same video that probably prompted the call. There was something about Google autonomous bikes yesterday doing the rounds, and it looked like a joke. I don't know.
No, it's real.
Right. Okay. Well, somebody's worked out the balance very well on that. Yeah. And from the sort of agents, the surveyors side of things, JLL, you talk about using a lot of data, a lot of different systems. Is there too much data? How do you know how to sort of derive the meaning out of this whole, the deluge that is coming through?
It's a fair point. And there's app overload and system overload. I suppose it comes back to what I was saying. It needs to be user-friendly and relevant. So it needs to be fresh. So if it's not any of those three things, it just won't work. And it won't keep working. So if it's not easy to use, people just get tired of it or just frustrated. If it's not relevant to what you actually wanted to do, it'll just get shelved. And if it doesn't stay fresh, well, just lose interest. So, but I think it's trial and error. Some things will work, some things won't. And that comes back to, I suppose, decision-making process. You have to be right when you do roll out something like this. You need to know it works. And I suppose it's hard for maybe prop tech companies just to get those first couple of clients on board and get going, because then they've proof that it works already. So Equim are well on the road. Originally from Australia, a lot of buildings in London, and now here in Dublin. So they had a proven track record, so really tap into it. So it's just research and knowing what you're getting into.
Are you noticing a change in the appetite from clients of what they expect and the time scales of when they want to derive some data for their deal?
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, and it needs to be, I suppose on the account side, it's always, what have I got in? How fast am I getting it? When am I getting it in? That's obviously key for any developer and any landlord. But it's understanding, I suppose, what the tenants really want as well. And tenants might know that themselves, but from these platforms, we can get kind of a visual on what their employees want. So the main decision makers at the top mightn't really know what their 200 or 300 staff below them really need, how to get to work easy, where they go to eat, how they socialise, who they socialise with, other buildings from other companies next door. Are they creating? I suppose the whole idea of Equim and we also work with One Plus Events. One Plus Events put it well because they did a lot of work in Maynooth College, and their idea was it's getting like-minded people to do like-minded things, and that's how they're kind of creating communities and just making it stronger. So you're just attracting people in and inviting people into that community.
And Carol, you're obviously never short of an idea, winning pitches left, right and centre for some of the initiatives. What's your view on where the onus should be for paying for a lot of these things that have a public good to them?
I'm very clear on this. The industry needs to step up in the large for this, and the reason is that sometimes we can get bogged down by looking too closely at the technology, but the reality is It's about adding value, and technology only will thrive if it's adding value, and generally industry extracts that value. So therefore they're the people who I think in the main part are responsible for driving change. But industry is too broad an answer, actually, because what we've seen over the last number of years working through PropTech Ireland is that a huge amount of innovation in the early days was consumer-led. So that meant that people who experienced the industry for the first-time renters, first-time buyers, first-time corporate occupiers, they experienced frustrations and thought this could be done better, and then they came in and developed a solution to do it better. And that's what drove a lot of the early tech, whereas what we've seen maybe for some of the more advanced things, what we're seeing are actually client-driven innovation. So I think that's driving a lot of the BIM technologies at the moment. And I was surprised to hear, actually, I think you were talking about the BIM adoption rates, because that's much higher than the figure I'd heard for Ireland. So it would be interesting to thrash that out. But what we've seen is that innovation needs to move to being industry-led if it's going to really be sustainable in the way that industry wants it to be. If we wait for consumers who have a problem to fix the problem, then we'll find ourselves written out of the solution, which is only appropriate if we're not adding value. Similarly, for the data centres or commercial or logistics, if your clients are coming in and insisting on this solution, which is what we've seen with a lot of BIM adoption, then actually you're behind the curve, and therefore as an industry, your livelihood may well be threatened, because if you're not adding value, you're going to be in danger. So actually the sweet spot there is that industry needs to be thinking ahead in these trends and getting there first, and aiming to deliver. We're coming back to people's demands have changed. What people expect has changed, and as an industry, we need to try get out ahead of it. Not just, at the moment it feels like PropTech success, particularly across the real estate sector, is seen as being a really fast adopter, and that's not really sustainable to drive the solution. You need to be forward thinking and trying to get ahead of the solution. Think of it as a hurling metaphor. There's no point in watching the slitter go. You need to go to where the slitter's going to land. And that's where I think industry needs to go.
Okay. Might need a translation on some of the, the sporting analogies at half time, but I had a couple of questions on Slido that relate to your presentation, Simon, from a sustainability point of view. How far away are we from seeing PV photovoltaic systems integrated into building facades?
I'm no expert in that area, but maybe the guys probably better to answer that. But it doesn't seem like that far to me. I know that some of the glass companies are pretty advanced with regards to their technology in terms of, glazing and integrating PVs into glazing and stuff like that. Kind of touching on Carol's point, I think it's, we've got to be aspirational and not wait for it to be almost consumer-led. You know what I mean? In our experiences, just touching on your point, it's difficult for us to target users. You know what I mean? It's the obvious thing for like software is like go to the users and that'll catch fire, and then they'll go to their boss and all that kind of thing. What we found in the past few years, people don't really like to change. They don't like to change their workflows. They don't like to change the way they do things. You know what I mean? And this isn't like a consumer-led product that we develop. So we've kind of changed our focus in the last couple of years and gone to, you talked about earlier about like going to CEOs and CFOs and trying to prove the value and the reason behind change in their workflow. And like let it be almost top-down approach, because it's difficult to get people to change the way that they're designing. I completely moved away from your question, but I'm not too sure about PVs in building, but I don't think it's that far.
Okay, please do put your hand up at any stage if you want to ask a question from the floor, and I'll come to you. There's another question for you, Simon.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot, quite rightly, about the climate crisis about time this year. Have you noticed a step change in demand and conversation?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So, as I said, we deal a lot in the US, and there's a big thing there, the Architecture 2030. A lot of signature, like I'm sure everyone will know that the US is a funny politically in that, you know, you have, you know, the country as a whole pulling out of Paris Accord and whatever that might be, but then individual cities still being signed up to different things, and the architectural industry has predominantly signed up to this 2030 challenge, they call it, that they have, you know, committed to reduce the building energy use of any buildings that they design by 30% by 2030. So things like that are, you know, that are, yeah, they're making a big impact, I think. More generally, I think, you know, whether it's developer or client-led or not, architects seem to be a little bit more switched on with regards to environmental performance, and they try to, you know, design the best performing buildings they can. So things like that, I think, are yeah, making a big impact, you know.
Okay. And Michael, from a workplace point of view at JLL, there was a question about the internal management, which I think in the whole sort of prop tech space is a fascinating area of how companies organize themselves internally to spot and adopt. Yeah. You're obviously an open-minded chap and you're adopting things quite happily, but is that the same for all colleagues, and how is that organized?
Open-minded could be a stretch. I'm a bit of an old school. I think you still can't beat just meeting people face to face and talking. You know, the emails, you know, Skype, whatever, you still have to have, and we do it a lot, just team meetings and just talk through the building. And that goes the same, just meeting clients, but meeting tenants, because they're so varied. So you can't assume everyone's, you know, wants to just look at the platform and look at a spreadsheet. Some tenants actually just want to have 10 minutes with them and just have a chat. So that personal interaction, thankfully, is still really important from our perspective. It makes it more interesting, but you have to have that still. You can't rely on, and we're guilty of it as well in our space. You know, in our space, I'll just send somebody an email, it'll be fine. You can't do that. You need to still ring people, which thankfully works. You know.
And in terms of adopting new tools, is there a sort of very formal structure of reskilling and training and meetings, or is it just somebody starts using it and bringing it out to?
Yeah, no. We do have structures around training. Everyone's very familiar with what they have to do and what functions they have to do that role, and that's a given. That's fine, but it's getting more in depth into the properties themselves. You know, and just if somebody has a problem, it's just literally right. Like some of the companies, I think you're probably working with a few I can't really mention, but scrum rooms seem to be the thing in a lot of tech companies, and they just have little rooms, little pods, and they might have dozens of them across the floor. And they're just rooms with no desks, nothing in them. So they go, right, 10-minute meeting, we're going to go into a scrum room and chat about what the issue is. And it's you're not on a phone, you're just talking about that problem, getting to a solution, and out again. So I think that's being done by tech companies at the moment.
But also being adopted by non-tech companies, that kind of workflow as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a speed of getting to the nub of the problem, and speed of how we're going to resolve it or who's going to resolve it, and then go back and whatever way you're going to resolve it, fine. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, from the Smart Docklands initiative, you've got the advantage of working with some huge, you know, tech companies there, and you've also worked with the property side, the landlords, the developers. Which is easier to test an idea with?
I suppose when we ran the workshops initially, I think the people turning up to the property workshop were probably the most reluctant. They didn't think that the Smart Docklands project was maybe anything to do with them, but I suppose whenever they saw that they could have an impact on the public realm around their building, the waste management solutions, what bike solutions would be outside, whether their building would potentially be 5G enabled, they started to become much more interested. We have two pretty good partners in Hibernia Rate and iPut now who let us, so sometimes we're testing things, sometimes it's some of our partner companies that want to test things, but they will let us use their buildings. And the CHQ building as well, we do a lot of testing in the CHQ building, so it's a building just along the quays there. testing a number of different solutions in terms of temperature, humidity within buildings. We're doing a thing at the minute with a company called ARM that manages space within office space within a building. So it's cameras in the roof and along the wall that processes everything on the edge and produces heat maps of the usage of floor space throughout the day. So it's a co-working space, so they can start to see what desks are the most valuable and what desks are the least valuable, and then what ones aren't being used at all. I suppose it was a slow burner, but I mean we're coming from a city council perspective, so it's pretty slow in there as well. So working with the property industry and the city council was slow to get going, but I think once people have seen the impact now, they're much more willing to get involved.
And if you've got a first meeting with a new idea and you're going in to see a property company and you've got experience of other initiatives that you've launched, what do you think are the levers that you're going to pull first and the buttons you're going to hit to get that property company interested to take it seriously?
Yeah, so I suppose that's pretty much my whole job, is working with loads of people who don't necessarily either know about or think that the thing may be relevant to them, and trying to understand what the value is for that person. So whether it's somebody in the tourism industry or developers or the public sector, it's trying to understand what the value is for that person. So I was just chatting to Carol this morning actually about trying to find a more structured way. We work with some prop tech startups. Carol obviously works with plenty of them, and trying to find a more structured way of working with the building owners we have in the Docklands and the developers there to try and get some of those companies into those buildings to trial and test their solutions. And as you mentioned earlier, trying to get, a lot of them just need a reference site. So we give it from a city council perspective. People go to other cities, like the C-Sense guys with the bike light are doing things in Manchester and Antwerp because they were working with Dublin. If somebody goes to a developer and says, I'm working with iPad and Hibernia Rate, then I suppose they'll be taken more seriously. So trying to give them that reference site is what we're striving for, I suppose.
And Carol, that echoes what you said about value, but that can mean different things to different people, can't it, these days? Social value, profit, does that change?
Absolutely, but actually I think when we look at urban areas, if you're trying to talk about value in the broader sense, it's placemaking. And placemaking goes into everything that creates the experience we have in the places that we live, work, socialise and spend time. And that's why it's in everybody's best interest to get this right. And that incorporates mobility solutions. And I think that it's so important to point out that, sometimes in Ireland, as within any other country, we all tend to live in our little bubbles. But the reality is that what's happening through Smart Dublin and Smart Docklands is genuinely world class. So I'm a judge on the Leading Cities, which is a global competition, and you're looking at innovation and smart city solutions from across the world, and there's some really interesting things coming out of the Middle East at the moment. There's some really interesting things happening in South America. South America, by the way, has been one of the most progressive in terms of cities funding smart city solutions, and they're trialing new stuff, and that means they're really enabling innovation that we will probably employ in a number of years' time. But actually what's happening in Dublin, and particularly within that 2 square kilometres down in the Docklands, is genuinely world class. So I would recommend any occupier down there, residential or commercial, but also anybody who wants to deploy a solution, getting access to testing environments is powerful. And the fact is, this has been enabled for free. It's a massive resource. So I would recommend that everybody come together to use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, that's brilliant. Join me in thanking our panelists this morning. Thank you.
Good to meet you, Michael.
Yes, good to meet you.